Behind me here is pretty much every single block in Minecraft that emits light. Yeah, there's really not that many, is there? So today I wanted to go through each of these to give you some ideas on how you can light your builds more interestingly. Lighting is something I often see people struggle with, so I've deliberately gone and experimented and done as many different variations and different ideas as I could. First up, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to hide lighting in your builds. If you don't necessarily want any lights on show, there are quite a few blocks that you can hide lighting blocks behind in order to add lighting to your build but not actually have that light be visible. So here we have the painting which lets the light through. That's a very nice way of lighting your builds up. It adds a nice little bit of decoration to your walls as well as being a functional part of the build by adding some lighting in. Next up we have some shulker boxes. A similar thing, it could act as storage in your base and also hide some lighting behind them. But also I think shulker boxes are quite good as a decorative block anyway. That pattern on them is very interesting. Trapdoors also count as transparent. Very simple, but you know, trapdoors are used in quite a lot of builds. You could have them going along the bottom of your wall perhaps as like a trim, and that's a very easy way. Just stick some lighting blocks behind that and you have pretty much free lighting for your build. Same thing with doors here. Probably a little bit harder to use because I mean a door is a lot more obvious what it is than a trapdoor. Maybe if you have like a closet or something in a build, you could put some lighting blocks behind the doors there. A surprising one, but one I really quite liked, is the walls. They count as transparent, so any lighting block you put behind it will spill through. Very interesting. And another one here that I was surprised by is the composter. That makes a very good trim along the bottom of a wall, so you can put your lighting blocks behind it and again achieve some free lighting in your build if you don't want to actually include an actual light in the build itself. I thought these blocks in particular were very interesting, so I thought I'd start off by showing these. Next up we have some more techniques with some specific light blocks here. We have these really cool builds you can do with torches, and this is simply placing an item frame behind them with a trapdoor in. I find the oak trapdoor works the best because it matches the colour of the actual stick in the torch the best. The mangrove trapdoor works quite well with the redstone torch here. Very interesting technique, and it kind of lets you use the torch in a more interesting way, because a lot of players now view torches as kind of like the basic light block, the thing that you just kind of spam everywhere to light something up. But having something built up like this really makes it seem more like a part of the build, like a deliberate choice that you've put it there. And I showed you these in particular because this is deliberately leading on to probably one of my favourite builds here, and this is my example of ambient lighting. I really like this cave build here. It's a very simple build, but the purpose of this was to create a dark environment to show you how to use mood lighting and ambient lighting in general. Here we have that redstone torch build here. Again, it's in the little holder, and the whole idea of this place is using really low levels of light, but using them in such a way that no mobs can spawn, because obviously that is a concern if you're building in survival and you're using low levels of light. You want it all still to be spawn proof so no mobs spawn. So blocks such as these amethyst clusters here give off a very low level of light. It lights up the environment, it spawn proofs it, but it has that really nice subtle ambient effect to it. And the same with these candles. You can obviously have, you know, keep building them up, and that's very bright, but for like something that's more meant to be more moody like this, the 1 or 2 stage is probably the best here. So I'm just going to kind of continue walking through. I really like how this looks. We're using the large amethyst bud here, which gives off a very low level of light. I do love the glow lichen. Again, that's another block that gives off a low level of light, but it just contributes to that really like nice gloomy ambient vibe here. Finally, you might not know where the lighting's coming from here. It's actually coming from below. Underneath this carpet, we have I'll just do that. Please don't build with respawn anchors in the overworld. That was a disaster. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Anyway, I'll show you using this one here. The respawn anchor is a very interesting source of light. You can have it kind of tucked away in the wall or underneath a carpet like this, and just be careful not to right click it. And it does give off a very subtle amount of light. It makes it so that you can see a tiny little bit, but it's a very subtle amount of lighting. And the more glowstone you add in, the more light it gives off. And I'm scared now. You can add one more. So obviously you can have it as a fully bright light like this, or you could have it on any of the other 3 stages to very nicely control how much light it gives off. It's a very useful block for that particular use. You just have to be very careful when clicking it. At the end of the cave here, I've just put a few examples of little wall lights, but I do think they're quite cool and quite simple. You can mix and match the different lighting blocks and trapdoors to create some very interesting textures here. This one's quite cool. It kind of emulates just like a little circular light in the middle with the sea lantern behind. The pearlescent frog light matches quite well with the new cherry trapdoor. The ochre frog light matches almost perfectly with the bamboo trapdoor, and I do love the design on that. And same with the verdant frog light and the warped trapdoor. I think they just make very effective lights. And then finally here we have the redstone lamp matching quite well with the oak trapdoor. They're quite good for ceilings, walls, or floors. You know, you can vary it depending on what the color palette of your build is. I thought I'd just show these, nothing too crazy, but I thought I'd include them anyway. Expanding on the respawn anchor a little bit, I've come up with some interesting designs for it. It goes quite well with the crying obsidian. I mean, the bottom of the texture here matches up almost perfectly with the crying obsidian. And I've made these weird little like obelisk things. I think these would be interesting for a nether build. I don't know if they really fit in the overworld, but depending on what kind of base you have and what kind of style you're going for, this kind of obelisk type thing could work for you. Additionally, there's some really nice particle effects that come off them at the top. It's very subtle, but it adds a little bit of extra life and animation there, as well as the dripping from the crying obsidian as well. Here's a bit of like a more built up obelisk rather than just the straight up pillar. We've got some extra like supports on the side made out of the blackstone walls. We're including another lighting block here, the end rod, a very, very useful lighting block. And then again, the amethyst cluster on the top there. They all give off light, and it's a very interesting little design, I think. Very like otherworldly and alien, so obviously depending on what kind of base or build you're going for, these may or may not work for you, but I thought they were very interesting personally. And yeah, just be careful when you're working with these in the overworld. I definitely exploded this place more times than I'd like to admit. This is an idea for some kind of pathway. I love the animation on the top of these. It's obviously very similar to the nether portal. Maybe if you have like a nether hub or nether tunnels or something, this could be an interesting design for the floor. Another thing you can do with them is put them underneath some carpets like I showed earlier. And obviously additionally to that, you have the really cool particles emanating from them. And a similar idea here with some similar particles, but just in a different way there, we have the ender chest. So I've simply just put ender chests all along the inner bit here and then just covered them in purple carpet. This was meant to be akin to something that you might see in the end. Maybe if you're building some roads in the end and you want to, again, spawn proof them, you might want to use this technique. Personally, I love those particles. I'm a sucker for particles in this game, as you may know from my other videos, but that is very subtle but also very, very nice. Here's something else you can do with the end rod. You can put 2 levers on either side and have it be a very convincing fluorescent neon light. Very good for some kind of city build, like if you're building in that kind of more industrial city style. I've shown this design before, but I think it's very effective and very nice. And something a little bit more sci-fi-ish you can do with it. Because of how the blocks work, you can put it on a wall here. This is more like sci-fi-ish, I think. I think that would work quite well in like a spacey kind of build. Very, very interesting. They almost look like some kind of energy tanks you might see. And I've got a few other different ceiling light builds here. I love the shaping on this one. We're using the signs on the side of the lantern to look like a little lampshade, and then again adding the end rod on the bottom just to add a little bit more shaping. I can see these being used in some kind of like mansion, a more modern type build. A similar technique here, similar colors, but we're using the beacon, a very expensive lighting block, but if you can afford it, it does look quite nice. And then you can surround it with whatever kind of blocks you want. I've chosen trapdoors here, but I'm sure signs would probably work as well. Let's try that. Signs are cool, but I think I did prefer the trapdoors. Here we have some interesting almost like chandelier type things. They're small, but they're simply just one block covered in the amethyst buds. I can imagine this being used in some kind of like mage's tower or, you know, some kind of magical fantasy type build. Same with this one here, we're just using the pearlescent frog light in the middle instead of the amethyst block. We're using the large amethyst buds just to add a little bit of different shaping to the side there. But again, there's probably different combinations of these you could do. You could definitely like vary it up a little bit by having it like be a more shaped chandelier. Kind of experimenting right now with, you know, seeing what you can do with this. Something like that is quite interesting, actually. It has that more like chandelier effect. There's more going on there. Next up, we have a little bit of more organic ceiling lighting. I do love this combination of the spruce wood, oak wood, and then a green tone in there. I think that's really nice. And then in this style, you can just dot around these little like bushes of foliage there. And the lighting itself comes from, of course, the glowberries, which add quite a nice amount of light into your builds. Inside this one here, I've put a shroom light because I think it matches the colour of the glowberries quite well, and it's almost like a larger version of the glowberries in a way. And it's not a lighting, but in a build like this, you could definitely add the spore blossom in for those lovely particles. And if you know me, I cannot get enough of particles in my Minecraft. Last but not least, we have this very cool like hanging flaming lantern. I can see this in some kind of like dwarven keep, very like medieval style. The blue flame has more of like a fantasy vibe to it. You can switch that out to an orange flame if you want that colour palette in your build. And fun fact, the orange flame actually gives off more light than the blue flame. Not the most scientific test here, but as you can see, there are larger numbers around the red fire here than there are around the blue fire. So if you are more concerned about actually providing more light, the orange flame might be better for you than the blue flame. But with everything here, there are probably an infinite amount of combinations you can do. I just want to get you inspired by showing you some of the ones that I figured out. And before I show you my favourite builds here and here, I've just got a few miscellaneous things I want to show you. Things that didn't really fit into any sort of category. Here we have these cool little candle holders, simply using the end rod as a little base to it. The candle fits on top very well. I really like that. Very small little detail, but I can imagine that fitting very nicely in the corner of a room. Got a few different variations of them here. We just got one with a birch fence because I liked how it matched the white colour. Got one with a blackstone wall, which I think is a nice base to it. But again, there are probably a lot of different combinations you can do with this. I mean, for example, here I've done one that doesn't even include the end rod, it just includes the lightning rod instead. Another kind of miscellaneous random one here, we have a scarecrow. I wanted to come up with something for the jack-o'-lantern, and I had a very hard time coming up with things, so this was my best go here. Normally, if you're building a scarecrow like this, you may use the carved pumpkin as a face. I think it's a very effective face, but if you want this to also be used to add some lighting, you could use the jack-o'-lantern like I have here. It's a very good lighting block, and it's also a cheap lighting block in survival, and if you have a little farm like this, a scarecrow like this guy could go a long way to adding some light and also a little bit of extra life to the build. Finally, for the miscellaneous stuff here, we have some underwater lighting tips. For underwater lighting, you don't have as many options as out of the water because a lot of things get broken by water, such as the end rod and the torch there. As you can see, the candle and the lantern stay, but I don't really think it makes too much sense to have a lantern underwater, and the candle itself, even though you can place them, you can't actually light them, so they are pretty much useless underwater. They might make for quite interesting decorations, like, you know, they kind of match the sea pickles in a way, but for lighting, they're pretty useless. Personally, sea pickles are my favourite lighting source for underwater, because if you place them underwater, they do emit light, and the more you place down, the more light they emit. They're basically underwater candles. Also, they work as a nice foliage block. They add a little bit of variation rather than just having all of it be seagrass. They are quite nice, I think, and I think they're the best option here. Additionally, the soul lantern is quite good. I think it makes a little bit more sense for maybe to have a soul lantern underwater rather than one that is powered by flame. And it also matches the colour palette of a prismarine build quite well, which is probably some of the materials you'd be using if you're building underwater. Here's a couple of other things you can do with the sea pickles. They go very well on top of a fence like this. You can have your own little custom plants. I quite like these. these. I guess they're kind of like the flower on top, and it makes it look a little bit more intentional rather than just randomly dotting these around. Of course, that does work if you are kind of just going for a natural vibe, but if you want something that definitely looks like you've deliberately done this and more purposeful, these types of builds are quite good. You got one coming off the wall there. Inside this little pod here itself, which is meant to kind of replicate maybe an underwater base, I've just put a sea lantern because it matches the color palette of the build. You could definitely use that technique from earlier with putting the trapdoors over the lighting to add a little bit of extra texture there. Very simple, but also very nice, I think. But if you're sick of underwater lighting entirely, and maybe can't be bothered with it at all, you could always just use a conduit. If you want to just be able to see underwater, the conduit gives you the conduit power effect, which gives you basically underwater vision. Using a conduit is very cool though, because I'm not sure if you can hear that, but it has a very interesting sound effect to it. It's got like a heartbeat, so you could use that for some kind of like environmental noises in your build maybe. That's quite interesting. That's it for the miscellaneous stuff. Now I want to go on to probably my favourite actual lighting builds here. These are some custom plants, and I've shown plants like these in many of my videos before. I've tried to go for a little bit of a different style here, kind of keeping them a little bit smaller and using some different blocks with them. Kind of alien-ish, but I think they could fit into different types of builds depending on what types of blocks you use and what colours you use. The pearlescent frog lights go quite well with the twisting vines here. I love how they sit on top. And similar designs here, but using walls and fences. We have one that's kind of bending in an interesting way here using this sea lantern with some lichen on it, which adds a nice little bit of organic texturing. Similar designs here, but just using some different colours with the ochre frog light. And then using the shroom light here, I find that matches quite well with the new bamboo fences. Last but not least, this one's a little bit strange, but I liked the coloration of it, and it has a very nice bit of shaping to it. It's a very interesting little plant there. The orange of the shroom light also works quite well too. It matches the color palette nicely, I think. Yep, these are really cool, and I definitely need to implement these into my own survival world. Last but not least here, we have a variety of different street light designs. I've deliberately made a variety of different styles of street lights here to try and fit them into as many different build styles as possible. Here we have some very like steampunk street lights. I do love a good steampunk style. I love using these lightning rods as a very thin pole there, and it goes very well with the size of the lantern as well to have a very interesting shape to it. And then you can always add a little shade on the top, which again adds some nice interesting shaping. And this technique is simply accomplished by hanging the lantern off whatever block is on the top. We're using that sign technique again to add a nice interesting little shade. And then I'm just varying the shaping up on this one a little bit by using some acacia fences instead of lightning rods. Here we have another couple of lantern based designs. This one is very simple. It's just whatever wood you choose with the trapdoors, the slabs, the fences, and then just hanging some lanterns on there with a little bit of a stone base here. This design here has a similar idea but gives it a more mechanical look. We're using some blocks here with a lot of detail in, like the lodestone, using the levers to add a nice little bit of shaping. Kind of looks like they're hanging off there. I really do like this design in particular. Here I have a couple of other streetlight designs I do really love. This one is cool in particular because I've actually used the daylight detector on top of here, so it will only come on at night. Here's another one that has a similar shape to it with just a very simple pole with two slabs coming over and then a lantern hanging off. Kind of a more darker, more metallic style. Might do good in a more like medieval setting maybe, and using some very interesting blocks to shape it there. I've got another one with some hanging lanterns here, and at the base I really like this. It kind of has a little planter in it. This is something that you might see in the real world where a light fixture would have a little planter in the bottom just to add a little bit of greenery to your city, wherever this light is placed. Very interesting. And then again, if you want some foliage, here's one that's a very like agricultural style. We're using the glowberries as the actual lighting block here, and then I've just kind of used a few other natural types of blocks. We've got the moss in the bottom there kind of surrounded. We're then using the flowering azalea as the kind of base of the light here, going up into a beehive, which is very nice. You could have some bees flying around here and they will naturally gather round this because it has the beehive and also a block that they can can pollinate. It might go well in some kind of like cottage core or like fairy core build. Next up here we have a different type of organic one, where it's kind of got a more metallic and structured middle here. We have these like organic berries hanging off here, and I really like this design. It could go well in like an aquatic build, like if you've got a guardian farm maybe, this could be quite good. I do love using the twisting vines as kind of something to hang something off there. Here we have a couple of campfires making a very simple looking lantern, something you might see if you're going for like maybe a more of a tribal type base, some kind of base that uses very simplistic materials like this. These ones here fit that same kind of aesthetic. Maybe if you have a base in like a desert or a savanna or something, these could be quite good for that. And these are using the decorated pot to add a little bit of interesting shaping. This one's using that torch technique that I showed earlier, and the block here is the regular version of a terracotta. This one got terracotta on the bottom and it goes in, interestingly, and then we have a campfire on top. Again, I put another little shade on it, and I quite like how you can use the signs for that technique. Then these two are very simple. We simply just got, again, two pots with a block in the middle and then a lantern on top, and then again a pot, wall, and then a lantern. Very simple, but also a very interesting shaping. One really cool thing I neglected to mention when I first recorded this video is that you can totally use the decorated version of the pots here to create some very nice detail in your builds and almost like tell a story with the pillars. They definitely remind me of something like totem poles, which would usually depict something of importance to whatever tribe originally built them. And last but not least, here we have a couple of interesting little street lights, very traditional Japanese style, I think. We have a red variant. This one is very similar, but we're just using the lever here inside of an item frame that is then kind of connecting to this lightning rod, and it's almost like it's holding it up there. It's got some nice support to it. And then for a more like aquatic color palette, I think this could go very well in a guardian farm or something like that. I'm using the deep slate and the warped wood. And then for the actual lighting block itself, again, I'm using the beacon. So that's it, that's all the lighting stuff I have. I really liked making the lights for this video. It was a very, very fun process, and I think the techniques I've shown are very worthwhile and maybe things you might not have thought of yourself, so I hope they inspire you in some way to create some more interesting builds and add some more interesting lighting fixtures. So thank you very much for watching this video. I do have a Patreon if you want to help support me and make this whole YouTube thing a little bit more sustainable while I'm still small. I have a Ko-Fi as well for more like one-off donations if you want to do that. But other than that, you can like the video and subscribe and catch whatever the next video will be. I hope to see you there.